Well, once again, here we are, episode 2 of my interview with master craftsman George Berry. I'm David DeChant. We are in a building that George creates his masterpieces from. And when I first moved here, it was owned by an old mechanic named Shorty Mac. And Shorty Mac was quite a character, but I think he filled his shoes quite nicely. About 10 feet this way is flora and fauna.
The storefront.
The storefront. And that used to be where we would have art shows, and you would use...
That used to be my furniture showroom.
Yes. And now it's full of houseplants. But that's also fitting in some way.
But I'm sitting a little high in my chair because my billfold is fatter now.
Oh, wow. That's great stuff. Well, when last we saw you, you were telling us about sailing to Bimini.
Right. I just decided to design and build furniture, and I decided that I needed to learn how to build it first. I didn't know anything about furniture, and or especially building it. So I never took any woodworking courses or anything like that. So, and when I went back to Auburn, I had to take freshman courses, and the first course that was a prerequisite to everything was use of the library. This was before computers, so you had to learn how to use the card catalog and all that microfiche and all this other stuff. So I tried to find a woodworking book, a book that would tell me about woodworking tools and how to use them. And they didn't have it. And I was taking the course to find it. And they didn't have it. The only thing I could find is periodicals like Popular Science might have some article about a hand plane, something like that. So that wasn't there.
Was there a Highland Hardware at the time?
No. No, there were no hardware stores that catered to woodworkers. There was no place in Atlanta that you could buy exotic wood. I wanted to do rosewood early in my career. I wanted to do a rosewood because I heard it was the most Brazilian rosewood was the most expensive, and I couldn't find it in Atlanta. That was when I had Georgia State.
Most expensive, important because of your level of craftsmanship, or just because you wanted to brag that it was the most expensive?
Both. I figured if I'm going to be doing all this work on a piece of furniture, it might as well be expensive wood. It might as well be rosewood.
Mm-hmm.
So, but the last video, we left off where I was sailing to Bimini.
Sure.
And I wanted to be on a wooden sailboat. I wanted to know how the joints were made. I figured shipwrights were as good, if not better, than cabinet makers when putting wood together, because the finished product was under a lot more stress than a piece of furniture. So I got the first job on the Antares, which is a very nice yacht, and the second job on a small 23-foot wooden boat. And of course I checked out all the joints while I was sailing, and I sailed on that boat for 6 months. And we went to Bimini, and then we got outside of Bimini. We went diving around Bimini Island, and I saw the Bimini Road in the water, and it does look like a road. It's a tourist attraction now. It looks great blocks, all square, huge blocks, not too far under the water, maybe 12 feet deep at low tide.
A natural formation?
It turned out to be a natural formation.
Oh,
okay. But it was a tourist trap because everybody said Atlantis might be around here. That could be the road to Atlantis.
Sure.
And I think Disney built a hotel on Bimini that they called Atlantis. But it turned out to be a natural formation. When you're diving on it, you've discovered something. It's like you found archaeology. So we got out away from Bimini, waiting for the cold front to come through so we could get a lot of what the skipper called easting. We wanted to have a lot of easting, and get as far east into the Atlantic Ocean as we could go with the cold front coming through, and then we'd just naturally fall down on the trade winds and then go to Europe. So we went out, and cold front came through, and the storm was so bad we had to hide behind an island. When the storm left, he said, okay, that was a rare thing, so we'll just do it again. And we did it again, and the same thing happened. Only this time the storm was even worse. And the waves got so high, and the waves were so close together that they would lift the boat up, and the water would fall out from underneath the boat, and the boat would crash flat. And he was afraid that the boat was going to break up. So we went behind another island again. And when it was daytime, sunlight, he says, well, I don't know if we're going to try that again. I don't have any place to be, anything to do. Or you don't have any place to be or anything to do. We're both free. So why don't we just go island to island through the Bahamas and then into the Caribbean, and go island to island all the way to Jamaica, all the way to Hispaniola, and then go across the Mona Passage to Puerto Rico, and then hopscotch down the southern coast to Puerto Rico and go to the Virgin Islands. And then from the Virgin Islands, we can sail to Europe pretty easily. We'll be pretty close to the trade winds already.
So there was a mission involved, but you were just going to get there. There was a destination, a final destination.
Right. I wanted to backpack through Europe, and that was the reason. And I wanted it on a wooden boat. Wanted to sail on a wooden boat so I could study the architecture of the wooden boat. And I played with the idea of maybe being a naval architect, but I couldn't build the boat.
Were all these waves giving you seasickness, or
No, that's what that's what the skipper told me on the way to Bimini. When in the crossing the Gulf Stream, you have to sail at an angle to go straight. The Gulf Stream is taking you off course. You have to sail the other side of your course to keep your course, and the waves are high. So when we got through the Gulf Stream, everything was good, and it was a rough voyage. And he sent me below to pump the bilge, and he sent me forward to the bowsprit to take in the spinnaker, and the bowsprit was burying in each wave. So the bowsprit, my feet got wet while I was because it was burying the next wave. When we got to Bimini, he said, well, the reason I had you do that was because if you get seasick, you're useless to me. I've had crew get seasick, and they're worse than having no crew. It's hard to sail the boat if you have to take care of somebody who's seasick. Seasick, you're out of commission. You're so nauseous you can't do anything. And he said, you passed.
It's a 23-foot boat, you and one other guy. So you are the crew.
That's correct.
You're the whole deal.
I am the whole crew. And he is the captain. He is the skipper. What he says goes. So he said, well, let's go island to island. I said, all right, that sounds like a plan. And we went island to island. He had the same Bahamas guide that he had to find out the radio station on Bimini so he could tune the radio, and then that was the way to go to Bimini. He had the radio station frequency on every island. Every island has its own radio station, and they advertise it to people on the island, and it's a small little community like that.
So there's no maps before you with compasses and all the things you see in movies where some captain's trying to...
Oh yeah, we had charts and we had
okay.
sextant. We could do that. We could navigate by the stars if we wanted to. But the Bahamas guide told us all about the island and what was unique about that particular island, and it had the radio station, and it had its longitude and latitude, and so.
Was there rum to be had on each of these islands?
Oh yeah.
Sugar cane made.
Oh yeah. It is custom in yachting to have a drink when the sun is over the yardarm. The yardarm is the cross piece that goes, it crosses the mast. So when the sun is over the yardarm, you're supposed to take a drink.
About what time of day is that?
6 o'clock.
Okay.
So the first island we got to, the skipper took a Clorox gallon that he had cleaned out.
Mm-hmm.
And he went on a mission. He went to a distillery that distilled rum. So he had the rum, and we took a shot of rum every day. That was custom. And every day I went diving for dinner. People think, and I thought too, that every time I went to the beach and I went swimming in the ocean, it was muddy. It was murky. I thought ocean water was turbid.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not. It's crystal clear. So when I was diving in the Caribbean, it was like being outside. You could see way far away.
And diving instead of fishing, you mean?
Right,
No,
I went
not-
snorkeling.
Oh, okay.
I
To
would-
catch a thing by hand or with a spear or...
With a pole gun.
Okay.
It's like a frog gig.
Yeah.
It's like a long pole with a gig on the end of it, with prongs sticking out that are barbed. It was actually a frog gig, but you take a rubber band and wrap it on the end of it, then you put the rubber band inside of your hand, and then you hold right behind the gig, you stretch the rubber band out, and when you let go, the rubber band shoots the gig forward. So you swim up to a fish and put the gig right next to him and let go, and it goes right through him.
And you're eating grouper and snapper and lobster and...
First of all, we were eating lobster because you could swim down, look in a hole between rocks and stuff, and look in there and see the lobster's antenna sticking out. And you could shoot that gun down in there and come out with a lobster. Now, the first lobster were as big as large shrimp. You could take a lobster, and it was like the tail was like a prawn or a big shrimp. The further south we went, the bigger the lobster got. So when we were in South Caicos Island, I'd go diving for dinner, and I would come back with a lobster that was so big, the cleaned meat of the tail was as big as my forearm. Just sitting on a plate. In South Caicos Island, the natives ate the legs of the lobster. They didn't eat the tail. The tail was too tough for them. The legs was sweeter meat, they said.
Okay.
And it was like the same size as Alaskan king crab legs.
So you had rum, you had fresh food. You must have kept some kind of staples, like
He would buy vegetables when we stopped on an island. He would buy rice. He'd stock up on things to eat, but we never bought an entree.
right.
It was all diving, and I never failed. Every day we were sailing for 6 months to come back with dinner. In the Caribbean, there is an awful lot of poverty, but there is no hunger. Nobody's starving.
Right.
Because they always got food. The jungle provides food, and the ocean provides food for anybody who wants to go get it. There's papaya in the jungle that are bigger than a football. There is no hunger. So we decided to go island to island. We had the Bahamas guide, and every night I'd go diving for dinner. And the skipper he didn't want lobster. He laughed at me when I had my 6th lobster. The first time we had lobster, I had 6 of them. They were small, but I had 6 of them. We had butter and lemon, and we were going to town. He said, "You'll get used to it." And so by the time we got to South Caicos Island, 1 lobster was all you could eat. And he didn't want lobster anymore. And I didn't really either. Mm-hmm. It was easy. He wanted grouper. And they call it sea bass at the time, sea bass. So he wanted grouper. And we could get huge grouper. You could look down in a hole between the rocks on the coral reefs on the bottom. It was all coral. And you'd look down in some hole and you'd see this big grouper treading water in there. And you could sneak that pole gun right up to them, boom, and get them. It wasn't a matter of missing. I never missed because I got so close to him and I wasn't moving. I just coast close to him. Bam.
And you didn't want too big of one, I guess, because you didn't want to waste anything or eat leftovers or whatever, I guess.
I don't think I ever saw one and said, no, it was too big. So what he really wanted me to come back with was sea turtle. Now this was before they were endangered, and we thought the ocean would produce everything we needed to have. So sea turtle is what he wanted me to bring back. And I would grab a sea turtle every now and then and bring it back. And he actually made turtle soup. He actually made turtle soup. He had the vegetables. He'd throw that into a pressure cooker.
How long did it take to prepare a turtle from water to plate? That sounds crazy.
He did it pretty easy. Of course, at the time, everything he didn't want, he threw overboard. I mean, the ocean couldn't be polluted. It was too vast. So
we've disproven that now.
Yeah, right. Now that's not true. But he would throw everything overboard. And he said, the sharks will eat it. So he skinned the sea turtle, cut the meat off the bones, and cubed the meat up and throw it in a pressure cooker. Then he'd cut up potatoes, cut up some carrots, and throw that in the pressure cooker. And he put the top on the pressure cooker and put it on a binnacle stove. A binnacle stove has 2 pivot points on it so that it pivots any way the ship can turn. So when it's sitting on an alcohol stove in the middle of it, but no matter which way the ship is listing or turning or rocking, it stays straight. So the ship moves around it, and the pressure cooker stayed straight up and down. So that's how we cooked, in a pressure cooker, all the time. It was quick. It was easy. The fuel wasn't expensive. And if you had to, you could put rum in it. So we didn't want to waste any rum.
Sure.
So that's how we sailed, and that's how we did every island. And he'd chart out the next time we get to the island. We'd stay on the island for a couple of days, 3 days, depending on what we wanted to look at. We were on islands that the little kids would follow us around because they'd never seen white men before. And when the little kids saw us, they would come up and ask for a nickel because they thought everybody who was white was rich. Mm-hmm. So they would run up, and of course most of the islands spoke Spanish. The kids would run up with their hands out and say, "Cinco centavos por mí," a nickel for me. And I, at the time, was dead broke. So I would take my billfold out and open up my billfold and show them I didn't have any money. And I'd put it back in. But the kids would still follow us around. We were something unusual on that island. And our boat was so small, it was 23 feet. And that's a small boat. And we could sail up the rivers on the islands. We only drew 3 feet of water. The draft on the boat was only 3 feet. We had a centerboard that could be lowered down, so it would make it easy to sail. Some drag in the water to keep the wind from pushing us sideways. Mm-hmm. So we had a centerboard, but we take the centerboard up, and it only had 3 feet of water. So no other yacht that came to that boat, that island, would go up the islands. They drew too much water. So we were in places that no yachts ever went. Fishing smacks went. They call the boats that the island people went fishing on, they called it a smack. And the fishing smacks would sail up and to their own dock, and their house is right there. We would time the trip so that when we left one island, we'd get to the next island in late afternoon. So that it would be daylight, and never once did it fail that someone would come out and meet our boat to catch our lines, to catch our ropes. There is no such thing as a rope on a sailboat. It's a line. And they'd catch our lines, but they wanted to be our guide, of course. So first thing the captain would say, or the skipper would say, was, "Where can we find a cold beer?" And in 6 months, we were in some dives. Bad dives.
Not surprised to hear that.
Not dives in the water. Low-class joints. And when we got to Puerto Rico, he said, "Where can I find a cold beer?" And it was close to the pier. And we went into a little club there, a little joint that had a bar at one side of it, tables. And we sat at the bar, and he said, 2 beers, please." And I looked around, and in the corner of that bar had a concrete floor, masonry walls, concrete block walls. If you want a house to last in the Caribbean, you have concrete block walls. A concrete floor, concrete block walls, and there was a pig in the corner, a live pig, giving birth.
Mm.
while we were drinking.
So that's the kind of place that you frequented.
That's the kind of place I frequented, and I stopped looking for their health department score. So, and that was in Puerto Rico. As we went island to island, and we were in some places. I can't say that was in part of my woodworking education, but I was studying every wood joint in that boat, and I had a collapsible ruler, and I would carry that collapsible ruler in my back pocket, and I'd measure everything and try to get some idea of what human scale was. Now they call it ergonomics. And so, but I was more having fun than studying wood. And when we got to all the Bimini Islands, all the Lesser Antilles are coral islands. So they're not high above the water. The coral grows underwater. It won't grow above water. So, last global warming that melted the polar caps, the sea was higher. So some of those islands were underwater, and the coral reefs grew then. And then when the polar caps froze, the sea level dropped down, and they became above water. They were just coral heads that were above water. So that's what they are. You need the radio. You need to see where the island is, because you can't see them from the deck. You can't. Our boat was too small to have a crow's nest or anything like that. You just stood up on the bow and looked to see a blip on the horizon. And that was always good because we knew exactly where it was when we saw that blip. But we still sailed with a radio. That was the way we got around. So now, that was all well and good. We did a lot of different islands. We had a great time. But we were through with coral islands. And Cuba, Jamaica, Dominican Republic, Haiti, they're not coral islands. They're mountaintops in the bottom of the sea. So they are not blips. They come out of the water straight up. I mean,
they have mountains and the whole.
They are mountains, big mountains, and there's not very much beach. You just the first time we were going to the Dominican Republic. And we were sailing to the Dominican Republic, and we had to pass Haiti. And the skipper did not want to get close to Haiti because there are still pirates out there. They're still pirates now that sail out and take over private yachts for profit.
Sure.
And he did not want to get close to Haiti because he was scared pirates, because Haiti was so poor that most of the working men could either work for the aristocracy or be a pirate. So he did. And what would happen is they would sail out to your boat and pretend they were having trouble and flag you down and ask for rope or something that they were having trouble with, and then they would shoot you. and take your boat, leave their boat behind, and take your boat and sail down to Colombia or Peru, some Central American country, and buy cocaine. And then sail it back to Miami and sail it into the Miami docks and unload it to a truck and then take it. There's so much sailing in Miami, Florida, that in Biscayne Bay, the big bay down in Miami, if you are sailing in, you just mingle with the other sailboats. Every time you come to a new country, you're supposed to fly a yellow flag on your mast, a yellow flag on the top of your sails.
To indicate that you're a foreigner.
That's called a quarantine flag. And when you sail in with a quarantine flag, you can dock, but you're not supposed to get out your boat until the agent comes in and inspects your boat to make sure there's no contraband, or you're not bringing any fruit in or any kind of insect or anything like that. So the pirates did not fly a quarantine flag. So they just, when it looked like they were out day sailing and nobody said anything, and they would sail right in. And he was scared of pirates. And another thing he was scared of was whales. He didn't want to get close to a whale.
Me neither.
In the yachting, it is rumored that a whale will come close to your boat and think that it's a calf. Think that it's a young whale that's sick. And the whale will go under that young whale and lift it up out of the water so it can breathe. And when it happens to a small sailboat, it's curtains. That boat was not made to be lifted up out of the water.
Yeah.
So he would go the other way if he saw any whales. You could see them. There she blows. They're putting up a big steam pile. But we went around Haiti and then went into the Dominican Republic. And Dominican Republic was a large island. It's a pretty big island. The island. Haiti's on one half of it. The Dominican Republic's on the other half. The island's called Hispaniola. And it's big. It's not as big as Cuba. Cuba is a big place. And we didn't stop at Cuba either. So Hispaniola is a big island. Dominican Republic's on it. The Dominican Republic is big enough to have cars, to have paved roads, to have restaurants. But that's as big as it got. There was no big hotel there at the time. They're about 1950, 1940.
In their technology.
Yeah. So we got in, we tied up next to a pier, and we had a seawall that was right next to the boat. And we tied up there, and two young ladies came down and sat on the seawall right next to the boat. And they didn't speak English, but they made it known that they were ladies of the evening. And one of them said, the tallest one said to the skipper, "Me likey you. You likey me?" And the shorter one said the same thing to me. "Me likey you. You likey me?" And I told the skipper to tell her that I had a girlfriend back home.
George, I know.
It's not my normal style, but I was scared that I would catch something and I would come up with a clap in the middle of the ocean. And I said, "Tell her I got a girlfriend at home." And he was not that wise. So he took advantage of the situation, but not right then.
So he had some money in his wallet, unlike you.
Yeah, and this part of the story. I'm getting to that part. The next morning, I got up and I said, "Now it's a mountaintop. There's a mountain on it, and there's a bar that the girls came from, and we went in the bar. I didn't have anything to drink. He didn't have anything to drink, and I said, well, I'm going to go up that mountain. I'm going to climb that mountain to the top." I was young enough so that was a challenge then.
Sure.
And I climbed that mountain to the top of it, and it was hand over hand. It was foot on a tree in the next hand and stuff. It was pretty steep when it got close to the top. And there was a gun emplacement up there. It's concrete dome with a slot in it, and you looked out and you saw the whole bay. And so they had guns there at one time. And so I came back down from the mountain, and I went back to the bar, and he wasn't on the boat and he wasn't in the bar. So I sat at the bar and I talked to the bartender, and he was saying, well, he's talking about what I did that day. And I said, well, I climbed the mountain. He said, no, you'll break your leg climbing that mountain. I said, no, it had a gun emplacement on the top of it. It had a big concrete dome. He said, oh, yeah, that's it. I said, where's the skipper? He said, he's in the back room. So, and I said, well, I'm not going back there. And he said, oh, no, it's okay. You can go back there. And I said, okay. And I went back there, and he was sitting on the bed right next to her. They were all clothed. And he saw me coming. He says, oh, okay, I'll be there. And he got up and he went with me. And he went back to the boat. And he got on the boat. And he said, we're leaving right now. I said, well, okay. And I was untying the boat, and the bartender came walking up. And the bartender was a good bouncer. You wasn't going to argue with him. And he was talking to Bill in Spanish. I didn't speak Spanish. And he said, I speak cerveza and corazon. That's the only Spanish words I know. And fria. So the bouncer, the bartender said, you forgot to pay her. And Bill said, well, all right. And then it became a matter of how much.
Oh, boy.
And the amount was negotiated down to $20. And he got the $20 and we left pretty quick.
Could you have paid in lobster legs?
No. There was no trading going on here. I think the bartender got a cut. And that was his money too. So everything was fine. He had money in his pocket. When he started, by profession, he was a yacht painter. He was a bartender by profession, really. And he bought the boat in Hawaii. And he sailed the boat to Miami. So he was a sailor, and he painted yachts, and that was his job. He lived on the boat and painted yachts in the yacht club, and he just walked home. So
did Bill catch anything from this gal?
No, but when we got to the port, before the gals came over, the captain of the port came over. He was in a military uniform. And he had a soldier with him that was in a military uniform. And that soldier was carrying a machine gun. He wasn't a sidearm. It was a machine gun, an AK. And the captain of the boat wanted, the captain of the port, the officer, wanted to board the boat to make sure that we weren't bringing any weapons onto the island. And you have to ask permission to come on anybody's yacht. That's standard in the business. You don't come up to a yacht that's docked right next to the dock and step off the dock onto their boat, because that's their house. You don't do that. You ask permission to come aboard. Suppose the boat's name was Tinkerbell. If there was nobody visible on Tinkerbell, you'd yell, "Ahoy, Tinkerbell! Permission to come aboard." And if somebody was there, they'd stick their head up and said, "Come on." Mostly it said, "Permission granted."
If you didn't, I imagine there's a different protocol. If you wouldn't allow them on.
You don't allow anybody on your boat that's wearing hard-soled shoes.
Okay.
You have to take your shoes off.
Okay.
If you're wearing soft-shell sneakers or something like that, that's okay. Mm-hmm. But no hard-soled shoes. And the soldier that was with the captain of the port, who had the machine gun, just stepped right on board the boat and started going through things. And his boss, the captain of the port, had a handgun, had a .45 in the holster. And Bill wasn't going to stop him, and I wasn't going to stop him. So, and the captain, the army officer, said, "Where's your passport?" And Bill took out his passport and gave it to him. And he looked at his passport and looked at his picture on the passport and then gave it back to Bill. And he looked at me. He said, "Passport." He looked at me and said, "Passport nombre." He wanted to know my passport number.
Okay.
So I didn't have one. So in the Caribbean, and you don't really need a passport, they'll take your driver's license. In the Virgin Islands, where we were going, it was an American possession. You didn't need a passport to go to the Virgin Islands. And so Bill, the skipper, he said, "Show him your driver's license." And I took my driver's license out. It had my picture on it, and the army officer looked at it and said, "Passport nombre." And Bill pointed to my driver's license number and said, "Right there. That's it." And the Army officer said, "Okay," and he wrote that down. And by the time he wrote that down, the guy had looked through that very small boat and knew that we weren't bringing any arms or ammunition into the island. The soldier that was with him, he got off the boat, and then the Army officer wanted Bill's camera, the camera that he was taking his pictures with. He wanted his camera, and he was willing to pay for his camera. And Bill didn't want to sell him his camera, but he had a guy with him, he had a machine gun. So they went back and forth about selling the camera, and finally the officer gave up. It's hard to tell a guy with a sidearm no, but he gave up. And he did say, when he left, he did say, "All the girls are clean." And then he left. So Bill wasn't taking that big of a chance, but I wasn't going to trust him. I didn't take that chance. So we sailed out of there, and then we went to Puerto Rico. We sailed across the Mona Passage from Puerto Rico to Puerto Rico. And the Mona Passage is what big ships use if they're going to not New York, they're going to Mexico. They sail down the Mona Passage, and you can get to Central America that way. You get into the Gulf of Mexico that way.
It's a current, or it's
a wide berth and
between,
deep water.
Okay, yeah.
And the waves were high because of that current. The waves were so high, we were sailing to a destination, and when the waves got so high, they were higher than the top of the mast. They were higher than the sails were. So the wind wasn't blowing. And when we got down in the trough, there was no wind. We became becalmed, and the sails were just hanging. And flying fish would go from one wave to the next wave. They didn't flap their fins, but they glided.
Just popping out of the wave.
Pop out of one wave and then glide into the next wave. And they were in schools, they'd come out together and fly over to the next wave. And I said, well, geez, I'm going to tell my grandchildren about this someday. And we'd get up to the top of the wave, and there was wind, and the sails would fill, and we would sail, and we'd make progress until we went down again. So we sailed over the top of the wave and down the wave, and then became becalmed. And then we'd sail up. So it took us a good while to get to Puerto Rico. When we got to Puerto Rico, it's another island that sticks up out of the water. And those big islands, you didn't get too close to because there were rocks and projections underneath. And so we hopscotched around southern Puerto Rico. We landed in Puerto Rico, and then we'd go to south of the island, and went down that beach, just day tripping down that beach all the way. And that's where we stopped at Mayagüez. That's where the pig was giving birth in the bar. And then we got down to the end of Puerto Rico, and we went to the Virgin Islands. And that's pretty much where I got off the boat at the Virgin Islands. We were, he was going to go to Europe. I wanted to go to Europe, but that plan was 6 months old now. And I was in the Virgin Islands, and I got a letter from a high school sweetheart in general delivery. I didn't have an address, but the post office had general delivery. You could write to somebody, and the address was general delivery. The island was one name, the Virgin Islands had a name, and this town had another name.
But they just generically would say, George Berry on this island, hope he gets it.
They say George Berry, general delivery, the town's name, Virgin Islands,
So you
USA.
go to the post office whenever you landed on a big island.
Correct.
Yeah.
If you had any mail coming, you would go to general delivery. And I thought, well, maybe 6 months, maybe there's something there. And there was a letter from my high school sweetheart, and the letter said, come to New York City. It is the capital of the world. And I read that letter, and between every line, I read in booty call. So I had short, cut off blue jeans on. I didn't have any clothes. I wore those cut off blue jeans for 6 months straight. No underwear, just cut off blue jeans. And they were all frayed up because I'd worn.
Incredible.
But now I went swimming every day. So, and swimming in salt water. So they were clean. Clean-ish. And I still have those jeans. I forgot to get them this morning. I still have them. Next time, I will show them to you.
Do they stand up on their own? In the
No,
corner?
they are patched. They are patched so much that I can sort of read the patches with a different girl sewing them on.
Like a steam trunk?
Right. The patches were from a different girl. One girl macrameed, and she sewed a line of macrame up one side of it. One girl just had denim and would sew new denim on. And I had a Pabst Blue ribbon patch. It was about 6 inches by 6 inches. And one girl sewed that on. It was a different girl that sewed every patch on. I didn't want to get rid of those because it was sentimental value.
Trophies is what it was.
It could have been trophies. So I got that letter and I said, geez, this is an invitation. I knew at the time that New York was expensive to rent, to live there. It's terribly expensive. So, but it looked like from the letter she was offering me to come to New York and live in her apartment.
That's the artist. The artist in you knew that you had a shell to back into like a hermit crab.
I'm not so sure that that's more art than it is just overcompensating for a big libido.
One of the 7 deadly sins.
One of the 7 deadly sins. So I gathered up my piggy bank and bought a ticket to Charlotte Amalie is the name of the city, and I bought a airline ticket. It has a jet airport on it. And I flew to Manhattan. And I wound up in my ex-girlfriend's apartment, and she had a roommate. There was another girl. They were already out of college by this time, and they had jobs in New York answering letters to the editor from Newsweek magazine. That's their job in New York. They answered letters and signed the editor's name to those letters. They, of course, were very well spoken. But she had another artist boyfriend who lived in Greenwich Village, and he was a writer. And he was not going to go to Vietnam. He was going to go to Canada. He didn't want to get drafted. He burned his draft card, and they were after him or something, and she was living with him, and he was a little on the iffy side. He would see visions. He saw everything with electric blue light around it sometimes. It seems like he was teetering on schizophrenia. But she stayed with him, and I wound up with her roommate and living in that apartment. And they were going to school at Pratt Institute in Brooklyn. And I wanted to do something with wood. I didn't want to just hang around. I wanted to advance my woodworking career. So I decided that I would make some furniture for their apartment. And since they were going to school at Pratt, I walked over to the Pratt campus and walked into the art department and walked into the wood shop at the art department and told that shopmaster that I wanted to use some woodworking equipment, but I didn't know where to buy wood in New York City. And he told me where to buy the wood, and I went and got some wood. And the next time I came in, I was carrying a stack of wood. And I put it down on the workbench, and he was in the tool room, and they did it a different way. You had a shower ring on the top of it. It was like a clothespin or like a safety pin. Now a shower pin works. Well, that shower slide had a bunch of metal numbers on it. Metal tags that had a number stamped into it. And you gave him one of those numbers for every tool that you took out. And he gave you the hammer, and he put that tag on the tool on where that hammer came from. So he knew what tool it was and who was using it if it was gone at the end of the day. And I won his confidence, and I built furniture in the Pratt wood shop and took it home and put it in their apartment. I built them a bed, and there's no storage in New York City. And I made the bed high off the ground because it's cold on the floor at the wintertime in New York City. And so it was big enough for them to store lots of things, store suitcases, store boxes of books, stuff that college kids have. So they stored it under that bed, and I made another bed in that closet they had, a walk-in closet. It was a bed loft. They had a desk in there, and they studied on that desk, and I made my bed above that desk. But I advanced my woodworking career at Pratt Institute just by walking in like I owned the place, and nobody carded me. Nobody looked at my ID. Nobody asked me for an ID. And I made some good furniture for them, and I learned a lot about woodworking. So when I left New York, because there was only so much I could learn by myself in a shop. So I knew I had to go to a trade school to learn cabinet making. So I went back. I was going to go back to Atlanta and go to Atlanta Area Tech at night and sweep the floor in a cabinet shop during the day. That sounded like a plan so that I could learn woodworking as fast as I could learn it. So I couldn't go into a cabinet shop and say, I want a job as a cabinet maker's helper, because I didn't know enough about cabinet making. I didn't even know the names of all the machines. I had nobody to teach me that. So I went into a cabinet shop and asked the guy, after I took the course at Atlanta Area Tech at night and swept up at a cabinet shop during the day, I was laid off. So I went into a cabinet shop that I had seen beside the road. It was Decorator's Cabinet Shop, close to Piedmont Park in Atlanta. And I walked in there and said, "Do you need a cabinet maker?" And the guy looked at me, because I was a hippie. The guy looked at me and said, "Are you a cabinet maker?" And he looked right through me. And I said, "No, but I'm more than a helper." And I got hired. And I worked for that guy for 1 year straight. And in the first 2 months I was working for him, he cut the end of his left thumb off. And it was right through the fingernail. And it was on a dado blade. A dado blade is a whole bunch of saw blades put together. It's
thick,
wide.
super thick.
He cut the whole end of it, of his thumb off, and there was nothing to glue back on. It was all sawdust. It was all in the table saw. He cut the end of his thumb off. And the guy that owned the building was there. And he put him in the car and took him to the emergency room. And he came back to work the next day. I came to work the next day, and he came back to work the next day. And he was told by the surgeon that sewed it up. There was nothing to sew back on, but he sewed the end of his finger up. And the surgeon said, "Now, I might be able to save your nail, but you can't do anything to disturb the stitches that I put in the end of your thumb." So the thumb had a bandage on it that looked like a corn dog.
Yeah.
And he had that thumb taped to his chest. So he couldn't use that thumb.
As a deterrent.
He couldn't use the thumb.
Right.
And he had one hand. But he came back to work because that was his livelihood. And he didn't want any income problems. So he kept building kitchen cabinets with one hand. He would take a nail. It was all nails back then. There wasn't a screw gun. It was all nails. And he would take a nail and push it into the wood, and then pick a hammer and nail that nail in, and then drop the hammer and pick up another nail and then drop the hammer. And then that's the way he worked wood. So every time he needed somebody to help him, I was looking over his shoulder. And everything I had to do, he had to tell me how to do it. If he needed two hands to do something, I had to do it. So he was working on the kitchens. He was working as hard as he could. And he gave me projects to do. And I was working on those projects. And I attribute learning woodworking as fast as I learned it because of him cutting his finger off. So, cutting his thumb off, end of it. And I learned a lot because of that. Every process that it took two hands to do in woodworking, he put me on it so I could do it. And then he gradually got better, and he gradually got more and more helpers. No, he gradually got better and could do more. He didn't want to use that thumb because the surgeon who sewed it up said he could save his nail, and that made a big difference in how he could work after if he had a nail on the end of his thumb. And he did have a nail on the end of his thumb, but it didn't grow out, it went straight down. So he did have the end of his thumb, did have a nail on it. And after a year, he was pretty good. After I worked for him for a year, he had another helper. He hired somebody else. And there were two guys helping him. And that's when I quit. Because I broke my leg. Playing Frisbee in Piedmont Park. I broke my leg, and they put a cast on my leg from my toe to my hip. And I couldn't work anymore. I went back to college because I couldn't work, and I wanted to advance my woodworking career. And I went to Georgia State, and I said, I want to be a furniture designer. And of course, they said they didn't have the program. So I wound up running their wood shop. So I actually learned a lot because I ran their wood shop. After working for the cabinet maker for a year, I knew everything then. I thought I did. And so I ran the wood shop at Georgia State. And when I started making things for the school, then that was really, they started paying me, and I built a desk for the school. I built a big pedestal for drawing and painting, a big enough pedestal that the pedestal itself was 10 feet by 10 feet and was 30 inches high. And it had a toe kick all the way around it. And models would get on that pedestal and lay down and have poses and stuff like that. And they'd do still life poses on that pedestal. And I did a kitchen for the Dean of Arts and Sciences. And then I did a kitchen for the head of the department. So I was getting a lot of jobs, and I had a free shop. So I was making money. And I was learning woodworking. I was teaching myself woodworking. And then I went to RIT because I graduated from Georgia State and went to RIT. And we've already covered RIT.
Covered that, yeah.
We already covered RIT, and then I went back to New York City because I'd done the Pratt Institute deal, and I wound up living in New York after I won the show in Lincoln Center Festival of the Arts. Had a show, and I put an armoire in there, and I put an S table in there, and won the whole show, and get in the New York Times. And then I wound up living with a girl on the other side of New York in her apartment for 3 or 4 months. And then I came back to Atlanta and worked as a employee sweeping the floor in a cabinet shop, and then went to Atlanta Area Tech and did the cabinet making course there. And then I worked for that cabinet maker for a year, and then I went back to Georgia State and got a degree in interior design and sculpture. And then I went to RIT, and then I went to Manhattan, and then I decided to go back to Atlanta, set up my wood shop, and build furniture, one-of-a-kind furniture for clients in Atlanta. And I did that. I set up a shop. And I came back to Atlanta, and I was thinking that Atlanta is not very avant-garde in art. They don't have a lot of studio furniture, which is what one-of-a-kind furniture is sold at studios. In art galleries, it's called studio furniture, one-of-a-kind thing. So I started doing that. I designed individual designed furniture for people. They were one-of-a-kind. And I got some wealthy clients, and one of the clients, I was building him a kitchen. And I put the kitchen in a penthouse in Colony Square, and they had an architect at the High Museum. That was before they built the new High Museum, and the architect's name was Richard Meyer. And he was designing and had built the new High Museum. The High Museum still existed, but he built a new High Museum on their front lawn. And the client was wealthy, and he knew Richard Meyer, and he had Richard Meyer come over to his condominium and look at that kitchen. And Richard Meyer looked at the kitchen, opened all the doors, opened the drawers, opened the cabinets high and low, and he turned to the client and he said, "I have never seen such quality in all my career." So I kept working for that client for a while, and then I had a stroke.